Okay, welcome everyone. This is a support Zoom call for all weekly support Zoom call for all hospices and home health that operate in Mississippi and Louisiana. We welcome you today. Thank you for being here. Today we have a special guest that's going to be joining us in just a few housekeeping items to take care of, and Mr. Nicholas Fenner with the National Weather Service out of Jackson is going to give us a tropical forecast update as we enter this hurricane season. But before we get to that, let me just a few little reminders. Um, we record all of these sessions, and these are the particular sessions that I want to make sure everyone who's on today's call realizes that we have those interviews with your regional emergency managers, your district emergency managers with regards to this hurricane season. Today, we're going to be doing the tropical forecast. Next week, we will have representatives from Louisiana Department of Health as well as the Mississippi Department of Health to talk about emergency preparedness. I want to remind everyone that we have the at-risk registry. That's very, very important, where you're identifying those patients who would need assistance in the event of an evacuation order call for their neighborhood. It is required in Louisiana and highly encouraged in Mississippi for use by all home health and hospice agencies. It fulfills your agency's requirements for the conditions of participation through Medicare, in terms of that requirement that you have a method of communicating patients who would need assistance if there was an evacuation order called for their neighborhood. It keeps emergency managers throughout Louisiana and Mississippi aware of the special needs of your patients. This is not a registry for nursing home patients. They have a completely different protocol for in an emergency. So if you have a patient in a nursing home, they're not for this. They're not for this registry. This registry is for home health and hospice patients who are living alone without a caregiver, or who have a caregiver, but the caregiver is either mentally or physically not capable of carrying through on an evacuation order, or they don't have the financial means to evacuate, or they're just plain stubborn and they're refusing to evacuate. If you have a patient that fits any one of these four categories, you can put them into this registry. It does require the patient's consent, and these are the consent forms. There are about 44 pieces of data that we are collecting on each one of these patients to send to the emergency manager, and those templates are available. There are separate templates for Louisiana and Mississippi. There's also, you can go to our emergency preparedness website on our website, lmhpco.org, under emergency preparedness, and all of these documents can be found there, and a lot of other helpful resources. The at-risk registry does require a weekly update. 25% of our hospice patients die within the first 7 days of being enrolled, and half or deceased within 30 days. And it's therefore incumbent upon the agency to do a weekly update of these patients to make sure that we're only sending the names of living patients who would still need assistance in the event of an evacuation order call for their neighborhood. We do send out a weekly reminder to all of the users to do that update on Thursday. We do that on Thursday because on Friday morning at 7 a.m., we send out those reports across Louisiana and Mississippi to every county, to every parish. I went in this morning, and currently we have 92 hospices that have a total of 1,500 patients in the registry, 1,000 of which would need assistance if there is an evacuation order called. 500 of them we don't know because they weren't updated last week, or so we don't know what their status is. We're going to get to that in just a second. We have 95 home health agencies that have over 900 patients in there, 556 identified as needing assistance. The other 375 we don't know because the agency did not do the update last week. 73 patients in the registry this morning are missing either the parish or the county assignment, which is really important. The information stays in the registry, but it doesn't get transmitted anywhere if we don't have that parish or county assignment. 83 patients in the registry are currently missing a zip code, which is real important for first responders using GPS. So we need that zip code. And I want to remind everyone that the date of birth field is a little odd. I understand it's all zeros, but you put the year first, the month second, and the day last. And we really need you to complete those date of birth fields because some of the parishes are using are using our software to feed into theirs, and without the date of birth, they are not able to get a unique identifier on that patient because they're using date of birth. So please make sure you're using the date of birth. This is my naughty list, my weekly naughty list, and I have to say it's getting smaller, but there are 30 hospices that currently have a total of 500 patients in there that are not were not reported because they were not updated last week. The ones that are in highlighted in yellow, those are agencies located in Mississippi. All of the rest are in Louisiana. If you're on my naughty list, please get in touch with me. Let's figure out why you keep showing up on this naughty list so that we can make sure that all these patients are being reported to their appropriate emergency manager. Same thing with home health. We have 40 home health agencies currently with 375 patients. These are the home healths that have patients that were not updated last week. If you see your name on this list, get in touch with me. If you see a branch of your agency on this list and they're not on today's call, please get in touch with them and ask them to get in touch with me so that we can make sure that those patients are either taken out of the registry because they're no longer on service or they're now deceased, or we can make sure that they're updated and appear, especially on these reports that are going out as we enter the peak of hurricane season. Please remember we send out these reports to every emergency manager in all of the parishes and all the counties in Mississippi. They go out every Friday morning at 7 a.m. We also started sending out regional reports throughout Louisiana so that regional managers have these reports. Everybody uses this information differently, every parish, every county, every region, every district. And so you need to find out from your emergency manager how this information is being used. Okay, and we also have, as I mentioned earlier, a website at www.lmhpco.org. Under professionals, you'll see emergency preparedness, and there are a lot of resources there for agencies to use, not only with their staff, but also with their patients and families. Having said all of that, thank you, Mr. Fenner, for being with us today. Mr. Fenner is with the National Weather Service out of Jackson, Mississippi, and he is going to give us an updated forecast of the Gulf and what we've been looking at. You know, we've been waiting. We were told at the beginning of the season it was going to be a very active season, and so far, I think we're up to Ernesto, which means 5 hurricanes or so. And maybe Mr. Fenner can give us some insights there. Mr. Fenner, you have slides that you're going to use?
I do, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow you to share yours and to take us through this this forecast. And thank you again for agreeing to do this.
Oh, sure thing. Happy to be here for you guys. Okay, looks like we've got the right screen up. Well, thanks again for having me. I am Nicholas Fenner, one of the forecasters here at the National Weather Service in Jackson, Mississippi. Obviously, there's a lot of offices that cover different parts of the area. But just as a refresher, there is an office there in Southeast Louisiana, Southwest Louisiana, and also the Mobile office in Alabama does cover parts of the Gulf Coast. I think that would affect, portions of your area. So if you have any questions afterwards based on anything that's in this presentation, feel free to reach out to your local weather forecast office, or definitely feel free to reach out to me and get you in touch with anybody local for you. So what I have here, this is information based on the August 8th update to the hurricane outlook. And I tried to refresh everything as best as I could with where we're at now. For example, as you mentioned, we are now through Hurricane Ernesto. So this information should be the latest and greatest. So as you mentioned, I think it was kind of a news story that most of the agencies that issue some sort of a hurricane outlook for this year were not forecasting a record season, but their season forecast was a record. A lot of confidence going into a busy season. So let's take a look at where we're at now and what is coming up still. So we're here with this blue line, kind of late August, just heading into what is the peak of climatological hurricane season. Officially, it runs all the way through the end of November. But, from any experienced person along the Gulf Coast, there's kind of the peak window of late August through sort of mid to late September. That's really our most intense. And then we kind of trail off there through the remainder of the season. So we're just now right at the point where we're really, running into the peak of the season. And I've got a couple of statistics here to think about. The days from September 1st through 15th average one or more named storm ongoing in the basin. So if we look back at our climate in the past, it's highly likely just any given year that you've got one or more storms ongoing any day in that time period. And that could be out in the Atlantic, or it could be something, closer to home that is a threat. And also that same period of time averages a hurricane ongoing in about 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10 of those years. So definitely an active period, and one in which we'll be paying close attention. And I hope that you will also be paying close attention to any short-term forecast updates. So this is comparing our outlook that we had issued back in May. On the right of this image, and an updated one here is boxed in blue. Everything should look fairly similar. Basically, the NOAA forecasters just sort of etched out all of the things that we have observed so far. So they're still forecasting an above normal season, 17 to 24 named storms. 5 of those have already been taken up. As we mentioned, we're already through Ernesto. 8 to 13 hurricanes. We've already had 3 of those hurricanes, and 4 to 7 major hurricanes are possible out of that number. So that would be your category 3 through 5 type hurricanes. And we've already had one of those. Beryl blew up back early in the season to a category 5. Without delving back into the depths of how you get to the accumulated cyclone energy, basically just kind of tallying how many storms do you have per day, what were their peak wind speeds and things like that. That's an accumulation of the destructive potential of storms throughout the course of the season. And we're already at about 52% of normal for a season just with those 5 storms. And that's being driven especially by that category 5 Hurricane Beryl earlier, and also the fact that Ernesto has kind of trailed on for so many days. So we're basically that number there, 165 to 245%, represents kind of like a time and a half to 2 times or so the amount of hurricane or tropical storm activity through the season. So notes on what we have observed so far, though. We're about average for the number of storms so far. So getting to the later part of August, we would typically average about 5 named storms. We're a little early on the hurricanes. Typically, I think by this date, we'd have about 1 to 2, and we're already at 3. And the ACE, or that accumulated cyclone energy, is about 3 times what you normally would have through the state. And also unusually, I'm from the New Orleans area, so thinking about kind of the impacts of hurricane season so far, it seems like we haven't had a lot of activity but I thought this note here was helpful. 2 Gulf Coast landfalling hurricanes already. There was the one that affected Texas, and then also Debbie going up on the western side of Florida is already double the average for the entire season. So even though it hasn't been highly impactful to the central Gulf Coast, it has been an active season so far already in the Gulf of Mexico. So the factors that are driving this forecast through the remainder of the hurricane season are the near record warm Atlantic sea surface temperatures. The record was set in June for the basin, and then for July, it was the second warmest since 1950. There's low wind shear present, and that's forecast to continue through the remainder of the season on average. The West African monsoon is stronger and wetter than normal, so the frequency of storms coming off of the African mainland there. And then what I would say is probably the primary driver for the above or below normal aspect of hurricane season a lot of times comes down to the state of, are we in El Nino or La Nina? And in this case, a La Nina is still expected. And the update with this forecast, though, does point out that it is a little bit later than expected with that original May forecast. So it's now shifted, instead of being the August, September, October time period. Instead of being the August, September, October time period for it onsetting officially to La Nina, they have pushed that back to September, October, November. So we're still shifting towards La Nina, but maybe the peak is a little bit beyond, and I'll cover that here a little bit better in just a moment. And the main effect of that is that La Nina reduces the wind shear over the main development region out there along the equator coming into the Caribbean, which allows storms to get organized more quickly. All right, so talking a little bit more specifically about that La Nina portion of the forecast, this bar chart here on the side just sort of shows the official forecast percentages for each of those seasons, and they overlap here. So we've got July, August, September at the beginning. We see that the forecast for La Nina becomes the prominent forecast by this September, October, November timeframe, which of course, with our hurricane season ending in November, you can see that this is sort of expecting the shift into La Nina to happen towards the end of hurricane season as we head into the winter. The May forecast had called for this onset of La Nina conditions during the August, September, October peak of hurricane season, which would definitely be a lot worse, of the confluence of events. Shifting it back a little bit may have some implications here for the rest of the season. And basically that has slowed the most favorable conditions across the basin. So the forecast pattern still favors a likely transition to La Nina through the fall. A little refresher here on how La Nina affects hurricanes and development. Basically, the colder waters that develop over the eastern part of the Pacific, so off the coast of South America and Mexico, tends to reduce the flow of winds coming across the Atlantic and Central America towards the Pacific. And it also slows down the winds that are going across the Atlantic in the upper level part of the atmosphere. And so that weaker vertical wind shear allows storms to become better organized. And we see this if we put all of the storm seasons on a kind of a sliding scale between strong El Ninos, which would be on the right side of this bar chart, towards strong La Nina events on the left side. We see that as you move from El Nino towards neutral, towards La Nina events there on the left side, that the total number of tropical storms and the total number of hurricanes tends to be higher as you move towards the La Nina categories. And I've highlighted here showing where we're at. We're kind of in the neutral range right now, shifting towards the La Nina. So that's the primary driver here, as I mentioned, for this part of our forecast. If we look back at climatology, just kind of a sanity check for where we typically see storms moving throughout the course of the season. I've got the average here And this is basically just showing you kind of the redder areas or more orange areas are more frequently observing hurricanes or tropical storms per month. So in this case, for August, we see that we start to see an uptick in activity in the western portions of the Atlantic and up towards the East Coast there. And as we head into September, we get a little bit stronger signal there through that main channel of hurricane activity and also into the Gulf of Mexico. And our typical October really shifts to kind of a lot of activity that begins near the U.S. mainland to the Caribbean and tends to move northeast. And then by the time we get to November, the overall frequency for any sort of tropical storm or hurricane really trails off. But again, it would be primarily limited to areas closer to home. In fact, I can think of a couple years ago, we had that one hurricane that popped up in the Gulf of Mexico. So like just before Halloween. So just a refresher, we can't ever rule out those types of storms. This is just showing overall frequency and kind of when they tend to peak. So again, just to highlight there, our main regions are really busy in August and September. And then as it heads towards the later part of the summer and fall, we're looking at anything that pops up close to home. So key takeaways from the forecast update here. The forecast for hurricane season is largely unchanged. 2024 could rank among the busiest on record. Official forecast for 17 to 24 named storms, 8 to 13 of those being hurricanes, and 4 to 7 of those being major hurricanes, with about 1.5 to 2.5 times the normal activity of storms through that time frame. Again, also just kind of highlighting where we were at so far. ACE, or that cumulative activity so far, has been above normal. Beryl was a primary driver for that, being a Category 5 hurricane early on. And we're at 5 when our normal number of storms is at 5 for this date. The reasons for the forecast are primarily those very warm Atlantic sea surface temperatures and low-level wind shear and all of those features that are associated with the La Nina event and a stronger, wetter West African monsoon. So there are a couple of resources here. The quickest to go to if you want to know anything about how to prepare for hurricanes at your personal level, or if you're trying to kind of work on anything at an institutional level, definitely reference any of those resources. But the quickest I would point anybody would be ready.gov. There's a couple of just very simplistic resources there, including for how to build a hurricane supply kit. And I had that slide next. We'll cover this one and I'll jump back to the other one. Just some things to think about from the latest NOAA science, as far as, we get a lot of questions about how does climate change impact hurricanes or anything like that. And so a couple points here just to consider as you're thinking out into the future, not just this year. Storm inundation is often the most dangerous portion of hurricanes. And so with any sort of sea level rise, in this case, the current projections might be values up to 2 to 3 feet by 2100. This would definitely contribute to coastal flooding being a primary danger with hurricanes of the future, and also the increased rainfall rates with tropical storms and hurricanes being projected to increase by about 15%. That's the secondary factor with a lot of hurricanes. As they move inland, we get a lot of flooding rains here along the Gulf Coast. And then, as the storms progress up into the northeastern part of the United States, a lot of times. Categories, we talk about, Category 4, Category 5 type hurricanes are expected to increase, but there's a lot of uncertainty with this aspect of it, as some studies also project a decrease. And the same thing there for numbers of storms. There's a lot of murky signals with that type of part of the research so far. And then the strong ones with tropical storms and hurricanes are projected to increase by about 3%. Okay, looking at how to be prepared, thinking ahead a little bit here to kind of what your all's focus is with the type of care you provide and things. Just wanted to highlight, apart from your typical hurricane supplies that you might build for yourself, extra food and water for several days, warm blankets, full gas tanks, things like that. Just something to consider as you're maybe helping family members or some of your patients' families to think about things. Having the soap and hand sanitizer, disinfecting wipes on hand is definitely very helpful, especially if maybe either you're not going to have access to hot water around the time period that a storm is coming through. Definitely organize and protect your prescriptions and over-the-counter drugs. Don't forget about the vitamins. And then, of course, for your non-prescription medications such as pain relievers, anti-diarrhea medication, antacids, laxatives, things like that, especially when you're dealing with people who are older, it's good to have those on hand. And you can definitely stockpile those a little bit more. But definitely have all that stuff in an easy to find location in case the storm's coming through. You're not having to scramble for everything, as well as your important family documents, copies of insurance policies, anything you got to provide to somebody over the phone, ID numbers, things like that. And then any sort of personal hygiene items. And I've highlighted again here the ready.gov/kit, which has a full set of recommended things, flashlights, batteries, all that. So that actually takes me to the end of what I have. But if you guys have any questions, or Jamie, if you know of anything,
I do have a couple of questions for you.
Mhm.
One is, I heard earlier about this shift in, it's El Nino, right? Or La
Yeah, there's
Nina.
the El Nino, La Nina. Sure.
We're in La Nina, or we're heading into El Nino.
Exactly. Currently, that's the forecast, is headed
And
towards La Nina.
I heard earlier that there's um, this shift in the peak of La Nina, and therefore it's sort of pushing back our hurricane season later than what we normally get as the peak during the peak of hurricane season. Is that correct?
I mean, I think that's
The
probably
activity.
generally what
Okay.
what the forecast is. Yeah,
So
kind of favoring
I guess
the
my
back half.
question is, as we move it towards the end of hurricane season, does that decrease the likelihood that we will of a severe hurricane, or does that sort of just increase the possibility or the probability that what we see in terms of an active season is going to come in October as opposed to August, September? It's more like the latter part of September, October.
I think it definitely is kind of that what you're describing there. It
Right.
favors. Again, there's a lot of factors that come into play, but it favors that the busy time period will be shifted kind of towards the back half. Yeah.
Toward the back side. Okay. Okay. Oh, wow.
Which again, like I mentioned, we've had storms that affected the Gulf Coast in October, but a lot
Right.
of times you kind of think it also increases the chances, for some of these storms
Right.
that kind of linger in the ocean.
Right. In terms of rapid intensification, I know they talked in the beginning of the season about rapid intensification. With the five that we've seen so far, are they being classified in terms of this category of rapid intensification in the
I,
five that we've seen already, or they've
I believe that barrel fell into that category.
fell
I don't
into
remember
care?
the details on it, but I think there was some sort of a record as far as how quickly it intensified from like a category 2 to a category 5.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that one
Okay.
was definitely pretty intense.
Okay. Um, Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification on that. Anyone on today's call, do you have any questions for Mr. Fenner? Let's see if anyone's put anything in the chat box. We have something in the chat box here. Oh, let's do. No, Allison is just thanking you, Mr. Fenner, for an excellent presentation. I'm sort of encouraged, I guess, more by your presentation than I was thinking I was going to be. I remember in the May prediction out of the University of Colorado that made those predictions about how many storms there were going to be. I remember him saying that there is a 81% probability that their forecast is correct, and that part of that forecast is that they see a lot more activity in the Atlantic side as opposed to the Gulf side. Is,
Okay.
is that still,
That's
uh,
that.
sound?
I mean, that would align with probably kind of what we see as far as NOAA goes. They don't get into that level of granularity with the forecast.
Right.
Um, but I
But
think that is an
the
element to
condition,
what.
he was saying the conditions are riper for development in the Atlantic than there are in the Gulf of Mexico in terms of what they were seeing in back in May.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that's probably tied with to how warm the waters are. You know, like any storm coming off of the coast of Africa has a chance to develop earlier.
Right.
Is probably
Right.
what the
You know,
driving
we
factor
like being
is.
optimistic in this part of the country. You know, plan for the worst and hope for the best. You know, and so uh,
Exactly.
your forecast gave me an optimistic outlook for the next few months. Of course, anything can happen when we're talking about weather. So, thank you, sir. Any questions before we say goodbye to Mr. Fenner? Mr. Fenner,
Definitely. Thank you all for having me
I
on
want
today.
to thank you for being so kind as to get on today's call and help us with this. If will you send me your slides
Oh yes, yes. I'll
so
send you
I
the
can
slides.
include them because I will be putting those slides of making those slides available to our members as well.
Certainly.
Okay. Let's see. Yes. Let's see. And he was stop, and I'm going to go back here to end up with today's final slides, reminding everybody, first of all, reminding everyone that these recordings are available from ESF8, Emergency Service Function number 8, which is healthcare. These are recordings that were being done. And you can click on them for any of these topics if you're interested. And finally, I just want to remind everyone that we will be meeting again next Wednesday, the 28th, which is going to be the anniversary of Katrina. And for those of you who were around back then, 19 years ago. And we have folks from LDH and MSDH that will be joining us on the anniversary of Katrina to talk about standards with regards to emergency management and surveys and that kind of stuff. So, any questions before we say goodbye for another week? I want to thank everybody for your time and your attention today. And I will be, once I receive Mr. Fenner's slides, I will be incorporating them into this slide deck that you've seen on my side, turning it into a PDF, and I will be posting it in next Wednesday's calendar invite. It should be up before the end of the day, as well as this recording. So if there are no other questions, thank you all again for what you're doing in your community to ensure greater patient safety during this hurricane season, and we'll see you next week.